Hello again, everyone. Gavin here. Today I'm going to be going over XO by XLN Audio. Just go buy this plugin. It's that good. It's basically a sample library manager that speeds up your workflow with your samples, like a ton. It has lots of stuff that really helps give you plenty of inspirational material to enjoy with your own sample library. It has a huge number of features. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. So I'm going to go over as many as I can remember. So let's get started. Starting out, we got the space section, which basically shows every last sample you have in your sample library. Everything's grouped together by type and similarity. I can click on one sample, and you can hear that the red ones are going to be your kicks. Blue is your snares. Hi-hats are yellow. So on and so forth. So everything's grouped together by type, which is the color. Everything's also grouped together by similarity, which is determined by how close each dot is to the sample you're listening to. So if I click here and then I click nearby it, we'll hear that a lot of the samples are actually very similar to each other the closer they are to the original dot that I touch. If you want to go through similar samples a little faster, you can use the left and right arrow keys on your typing keyboard till you find the exact one that you like. Now let's say you don't just want to go sticking around in one central spot, like so. Let's say you want to kind of move around. If you left click and drag, you can go through a lot of samples really fast. Let's say you want to get a little bit of a closer view. Use your mouse wheel to scroll and zoom in wherever your mouse is pointing. So let's say I want to zoom in on my snares. Boom. Hi-hats. Boom. All that good stuff. So I'm going to zoom back into where I clicked with this. This actually gives me the ability to see even more samples and get a closer approximation to the nearby samples as well. Because the closer you zoom in, the smaller the field is for it to find samples. Well, I say that, and then all of a sudden, it's shooting everywhere. So, never mind, ignore that. If you want to drag the whole screen a little bit, right-click and drag to move the entire map a little more easily. If you want, basically every single sample that you see on here can be added to one of 8 sampler slots, which, if you have like a keyboard or a launch pad that you use as like a drum pad, a finger drumming pad, like I have a Launch Key Mini Mark III, you can map it to those touch pads. So instant finger drumming, very easy. This basically will take the place of most of your other apps that you might use to perform finger drumming like that, and sample sequencing and the like. So you can click on these, left click on these samples to hear each one and see where it is in the matrix. So that's the kick that I have selected here. If you want to change a sample, like let's say that's the kick I'm adding, I just click on this little button right here and it changes the kick to that one. So nice and simple to use in that way. That's how you can get all of your individual samples in. You can adjust individual sample volume with the sliders here. There are mute and solo sections. We're just barely getting started. This is just basically selecting your samples right here. Let's go into the edit section. This thing gives you the ability to tweak the heck out of your samples without having to use any additional sampling or recording software to actually be able to tweak or pitch things up or down or anything. So let's work with the snare for a minute. So I can click on this little icon right here. Gives me the ability to adjust the start time and stop time with these draggers, with these little sliders, draggers. If I hit the sample now, very useful. I can fade the sample in or fade it out. So that works in conjunction with the sliders. So you can really dial in what you want the sound to be. Freaking fantastic. I love how that works. There is, I can adjust if I make any tweaks in there, then you'll see this little kind of nut icon appear. You can adjust the panning, left and right, pretty straightforward. One nice feature, you can give it some stereo information by clicking on these little buttons. There's also little tool tips right down here that tell you what everything does. So I mouse over there, it says that it's a Haas, whatever that means. Left channel is slightly delayed for wider sound. So basically, suddenly you have stereo information in this snare. You can flip it the other way to the left side. Nice and subtle. Just click on it again to cancel it. My favorite part right here is this section, an envelope manager for your sample. You can adjust the transient. Right now I've got it really high, so it's punchy. Bring it really low. Softens everything. There is your hold time. Somewhat similar to adjusting like your fade out or these end of sample sliders, but gives it a bit of a different feel. So let's kind of put it back to wherever the heck it was. I think it was right there. Then there's your decay time, which is sort of like the tail of the sample. Make it stupidly long or stupidly short. And you'll find that the hold time really plays in. You can sort of see it changing shape as I adjust it. The hold and the decay really play with each other quite a bit. Think of them, you can almost think of them sort of like your sustain and release for the sample. There's a pitch section. Pitch it up, pitch it down. Oh, dang, I like that. That's pretty cool. I might need to use that. There is another little section, sort of like these little Haas effect things. There's a stereo pitch offset, which says that the right side is pitched up, the left side is pitched down. So it's very subtle, but that also feels like it sort of gives it stereo information. Go to the other side. It might just be me. I find that very hard to hear the difference between the left and right, but to me it just sounds like more stereo information. There's a tone section. It's sort of like a tilt EQ. Make it really bright or kind of darker. It basically, if I go left and make it darker, it boosts the low end while cutting the high, and vice versa. Boosts the high, cut the low. So that way you can dial in more of the brightness or darkness of the character of the sound. There is also a low pass and high pass, or low cut and high cut filter here. So that's all determined by these little knobs right here. High cut right here. Low cut. So it gives you much more. Basically, you can mix all of your samples in this plugin without even touching your mixing slots, which is freaking amazing. Let's see, there is poly mode. So this basically changes how the, oh wait, hold up, velocity. So this right here determines how sensitive the sample is to any velocity settings you have on your computer, which to me, this is freaking great, because with FL Studio, if I were to go into my MIDI settings and adjust my velocity curve, this curve affects every single MIDI controller that I have, and I have no control over that. So like my drum pads will behave basically the same. Where's the active key? I can't find it. There it is. So my drum pads will behave basically the same as far as velocity sensitivity goes as my keyboard will in FL Studio, which is very, very irritating because I don't often want my drums to be velocity sensitive. If I'm doing electronic stuff, I want it to be the same volume. So that's where this velocity section gets so handy. So it's like it starts out with the velocity centered. Basically, it's at 100%. So velocity will only affect the volume. If I decrease the velocity to 0, I get the same consistent volume every single time I hit. If I increase it, then I get more variation in the volume based on, how hard I hit the pad. Now, it gets really fun when you increase the velocity even further. So anything above 100% changes the transient even of the sample. So it says right there on the little tooltip, velocity also affects the sample start. Low velocities skip the initial transient. So for example, that's me hitting it hard. Hitting it very soft, you hear the entire transient is just gone. So lots of really fun nuance that you can add that way. Now there is a poly mode button. This thing is fun. So with it off, if I were to play my snare really fast, kind of sounds like a machine gun. Just basically with the poly mode off, it cuts off the sample the moment it plays again. If I enable poly mode, the samples overlap as I play. Again, disabling, enabling. To me, that just makes it sound a lot cleaner, much less like a machine gun. So that can be especially handy if you're trying to do more of like an acoustic style sample, give it much more nuanced play. And this is especially good for like a real snare drum if you increase the velocity to reduce the transient when you play it softly. So I mean, just freaking awesome, absolutely epic. There are mute groups. I have no idea what the heck those are. Let's see. So it says add 2 or more slots to any of the 4 mute groups to make them mute each other. For example, a closed hi-hat mutes an open hat. So I'm not entirely sure how to set that up, but basically I can set it so that like if I play an open hi-hat, that's not much of an open hi-hat, but let's say I play it. Somehow I can set this thing up to where whenever I play the normal hi-hat, it cuts off the open hi-hat. Very much like a real drum kit with the left pedal that you release and push down to kind of cut off open hat sounds, all that good stuff. There is a reverse section which reverses the sample. Guess what? If it's the sample's not set up right, you won't hear the sample trigger. Let's try the kick. And then flip that back to normal. So even more options to play. There's an output section. Here's one thing that's cool. There's 2 different versions of XO, the basic and then there's like the Pro Edition or something. It's basically the upper level model. If you get the upper level model, it supports multi-out. So if you're not familiar with what that means, that basically means that instead of having all the sound being routed to just one mixer slot up here, I can route every individual sample in here to FL's mixer slots, like so. So this suddenly gives you the ability to mix and alter your samples even further, because now the sound isn't going to one channel, channel 6 anymore. It's all going to, every individual sample is going to my normal mixer slots. So suddenly I have control over the samples. I don't ever have to leave this thing and go to a standard audio clip again. Just freaking epic. There are actually built-in effects with this thing. They're fairly basic. There's essentially like reverbs and whatnot, which are right here, FX1, FX2. So you can click them to disable or enable them. If I go to, like, I can change the length of everything. So let me turn on FX1. This is your FX send right here for 1, for 2, so on and so forth. So let me turn 1 kind of all the way up so you can hear it on the snare. So this is fantastic for adding room reverb or ambience to the samples within the plugin. Just freaking fantastic. I don't even have to add room reverb with a plugin. It's all here. You can adjust the length with Len, as you could perhaps tell. Make it a little shorter. Make it a little longer. You can change the tone, kind of like the tilt EQ. Deep and ugly. Bright and sharp. And you can adjust the signal level of the reverb. Make it louder or quieter. Let's cut that length back a little. Oh, too loud. Don't put the level very high. So keeping it kind of low for more of a room reverb sound. Just play with it. Have fun. If you like how it sounds, use it. You can change the kind of reverb or change it to a delay. I love these different templates. There's dark room reverb, slap ambience, claustrophobic sprung, and then WTF happened. I have no idea what this is. I'm curious. Oh, so it's sort of like a glitchy reverb. So that's a fun way to kind of fiddle with all that. Or let's try one of the delays. I don't know, like a fast dub, whatever the heck that's like. Let's see. Ooh. Ooh, I like that. So change the delays around. Let's try eighth dotted. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward, but you get the idea. You have some basic reverb and delay effects built in. There is a kit section. This controls the output volume of the entire kit before going into the master effects. There is a soft clipper built into this thing. So if I'm playing sounds, I want to affect the entire kit. I have a little bit of a soft clipper. I can add some distortion. There are low cuts, high cuts, kind of similar to these ones up here for the entire kit. Now, one particular thing that's kind of fun is there's a step sequencer, not entirely dissimilar from the FL Studio step sequencer. Right over here, basically, click to add a sample, click and hold, left click and hold to adjust the volume of the sample. Right click, doesn't seem to do anything. Now, notice how right under here, there's this little tiny section that's very hard to see. If I click under here, little tiny dots appear. This basically turns like one step into a double hit. Let me go ahead and play this pattern that I've got here. So you can see how it's going through all this. Let me kind of illustrate everything I just outlined again. So I'm going to add a couple of extra snare hits, but I'm going to decrease their volume by clicking and dragging. Oh, can barely hear them. So got that. Let's say I want to, if I click on this thing again, I can turn these same samples into double hits. So this is what that'll sound like. So this is really freaking handy on things like hi-hats. So really good for fiddling with trap, for example. So just adds a lot of extra fun to the mix there. There is the ability to change your pattern a little bit. So for example, there's an A pattern and a B pattern. So you can set it to where it clones the whole thing, or you can do something entirely different. You can set it so that there's no chain. So basically you play only section A or section B. You can set it to follow, where basically if you got A, B, or A, engaged, then it'll do so. It'll go to the next bit. So that way you can add a little bit of extra flavor to your beat. A, self-explanatory, I figure. Now, we're going into the sections that, like, I barely understand a lot of this stuff because I just hardly fiddle with the thing. So I can click on this. What the heck does that do? So this is a global or individual groove section. So basically with this, I can fiddle with the groove, or kind of the swing of one of these sample sets. So let me do it on the hi-hat. It'll be much more noticeable. So let me just add a little bit of groove to that. And now let's listen. Oh, let me show you something. I'm not a big fan of that hi-hat right here for this particular sample. I need something kind of clicky. I like that one. So let's add that in right quick. Now let's listen. So hear that swing? That is being added by this right here. I turn it off. Turn it back on. So just add a little bit of swing to the thing. There's also a tempo nudge, a timing nudge. So that basically makes it as if the sample is being triggered just a little to the left of the actual time or to the right. Really good for making those really slunky kind of off-time beats. To me, I find that feature irritating, but for some people, that's going to be something they absolutely love. There is an accentuator section. I haven't gotten to fiddle with this thing very much. So let's see what the heck this does. So I had it off. Let's do it, see what it does. Okay, so it seems like it sort of functions like a velocity control, where just certain notes get accentuated versus others. So let's turn it off, see how it sounds now. So that can be kind of a fun thing. Now let's see. There's a sample combiner section. I haven't gotten to fiddle with this thing very much, but basically, let's say I've got that kit that I've been working with for the past little bit. If I want to change the entire kit, go into the sample combiner and clicking on these little hands does so. If I like some parts of this, I can just go to each individual sample here. And now let's see how it sounds. What the? So that gets goofy right there. If I refresh, I think it seems like that might take me. Oh, not quite. Takes me to the back of whatever this is. So I lost most of my samples. But based on that, that might be a win. Live filter, what does that do? I'm not going to bother. That's way too many dang features on this thing. So another way to go through individual sample kits. Notice this little thing right here with all these dots. That's basically all these samples in here. So let's just play with the beat. If I click on these arrows, it changes out the entire sample set, kind of like what we were looking at before. That's kind of fun right there. So that's just a fantastic tool for finding inspiration for whatever you're working on. I've actually found that this is my favorite feature down here because it almost feels like it's genre sensitive. So to kind of go more into that, if I click on where it says mellow air, that's the preset. So there's all sorts of preset beats. If I click on degraded techno and hit the play button, nice and slow. Let me increase my project tempo. By the way, you can host this thing. You can sync the host tempo, or sync this to the host tempo by clicking this button here. So we see the beats per minute right there just changed. So now let's listen to it. Nice and simple. Set it so that it plays with this button anytime I hit the play button. So those are the original samples. Let's say I like this beat, but I'm not digging the samples. Play with this thing down here. Or another way, find a similar pattern, same pattern, similar pattern, same pattern, same pattern, similar samples right here. Ooh, nice and chill. So there are just so many different presets. You get more presets and more core content, basically more samples with the premium version versus the basic one. Like, you can see all sorts of different XO packs. You can buy more of these on XLN Audio. Basically just have even more types, so like Latin rhythms. Now that one's supposed to be fast. Let's really jack up the tempo. Let's see. And it'll have like the original core samples picked out. Just kind of keep fiddling with this. How far can we go? We can go really far. Let's see. Ooh, okay. So that can be kind of fancy. Now, let's say there's one of these that you enjoy. You can set it as your startup. So basically, anytime I turn this on now, anytime I load up XO, this is the first rhythm that will play. I can hit this little check mark to accept what I selected. I can change anything about all this that I want. Just kind of how, as we were describing earlier. So that's basically all the main features of this thing that I can think of off the top of my head. Again, there are way more. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface. I've had this plugin like 2 years and I'm still learning new stuff about it all the time. Another thing, the final few things that are good to understand is this button right here helps you to export all the different things that you've put together. So let's say that I tweak the life out of this stuff. Let's just make a few tweaks so that way something's different. So right here, I can click and drag individual raw samples into my normal audio clips. I can render waves, which basically takes all the edits that I've made and turns them into samples. So now if I take this, well, let's try the kick. I know I edited that one a lot. So now when I listen to this, that's the edited kick versus the original. Yeah, very, very different. You can also export the stems, which is basically the entire step sequencing section that you put together here. You can export the entire beat as a wave and turn it into a loop. So if you want to produce loops for money, this is a nice, easy way to do that. You can export the beat as MIDI. So basically just take everything, all the MIDI samples, so you can put it into a different sampler if you so choose, like FPC for FL Studio, for example. So that we've got the basic beat. You can normalize it or not. You can export the entire kit by clicking and dragging here. And boom, suddenly I've got all the individual samples that I've been working with ready to go if I want to do standard beat sequencing with FL, if that's my workflow. And like I can do the same thing with a processed kit after I render all the waves. Same thing with all the stems, export every single stem as a group. I can change the export folder so that way, like, let's say I have like a Google Drive folder where I store all my samples, boom, it'll automatically upload anything new that I make that way. There's a search section, which is freaking great because you can search for a specific sample if you already know the name. You can determine a frequency, the length, how drummy it is, or like that sort of determines whether it's more percussive or whether it's more like a weird sound sample like a vocal. You can tell it to search only for samples within a specific folder. So now as I go into the space section and start deselecting this stuff, you'll see that it gets progressively thinner because eventually I'm just going to go to the specific samples that I have selected. So I have a bunch of Ghost Hack samples. Suddenly I'll only be working with my Ghost Hacks. And everything else is kind of grayed out to where you can't see it or touch it. So very, very helpful. You want only percussive instruments. You want only kicks, percussive kicks, so on and so forth. Just great, great way to find specific things. This button right here actually determines which folders you're pulling all of your samples from. So this is where you add your samples. This is where if you add anything new to these folders, you can scan and refresh to add even more little stars into this constellation for you to play with. Another little menu button for pulling up some basic stuff, such as settings to increase or decrease the size of the plugin, make it work with different monitors or display setups. So I know this is a long video. If you've gotten through it all this way, thank you. That took some endurance. If I haven't convinced you yet to buy this thing, just go buy it. Please, like, XLN deserves money for this. They have done some freaking incredible things. Like, I'll post a link to the XLN website in the description. If you enjoy the video, leave a comment down below. Subscribe if you really enjoyed it, because I'm going to keep on producing more content. Every subscription, comment, all those help me out quite a bit. So thank you so much for watching this. Again, if you've gotten through this far, extra thanks. You got some patience. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope y'all have a fantastic day. I'll talk with you another time.